So I am a motorcyclist, so when I say we, I get to be a part of the we that are motorcyclists. I am a rider coach certified by the Motorcycle Safety Foundation, and while I have been, I've known Lee Parks and I have a great deal of respect for him, known him a very long time. I don't know anything about his total control curriculum that he created, so if I use lots of MSF type talking and not any total control type talking, it's no diss against Lee and his program, it's just I'm not familiar. So I am, when people ask me where I'm from, right now it's kind of a difficult question to answer, which sounds odd, but I have a summer home in Michigan. I have a winter home in Florida because my husband is allergic to the white stuff that comes down. Yeah, but I was born and raised in Wisconsin, and I still consider myself a Wisconsinite at heart. But I'm really excited to be here because I get an opportunity to learn the perspective from Texas motorcycling and what y'all experience that's different than what I experience in the states where I have mainly rode. I haven't ridden in Texas in over 20 years, so I'm sad that I'm not here on a motorcycle, but that happens sometimes. So I am, as I said, to get my RSP, I had to do a lot of studying. I'm a total research geek. I love reading research papers. I know, I'm weird in so many ways. And when Kathy was looking for someone to come and talk about lane splitting, sharing, and so forth, I forgot to take a step back, I guess. So I had an opportunity to do a lot of research, and I had some help. The group SMARTER, Skilled Motorcyclist Association Responsible Trained and Educated Riders, has a really great website that has lots of research on it. And I think part of why I ended up on the board of directors at SMARTER is because I like research, and they like to have a standpoint from a research-based perspective. As I talk today, I had an opportunity to read, like I said, a lot of research papers on lane sharing, lane filtering, and so forth. And I had an opportunity to read a lot of articles and talk to people about their opinions and so forth. And of course, like everyone, I have my opinion. And what I'll try to present mostly is information from studies. Occasionally, my thoughts will sneak in if there's something that I say that you think, well, was that from a study, or is that just something that I opined based on my research? Please ask, and I'll clarify for you. So let's define a few things. Shoulder surfing. Has anyone heard of that before? Shoulder surfing? All right. Shoulder surfing is, there's only one state where that's legal, and that's Hawaii. Kind of funny that, a big surf area, and what they have in their law is the law allows the Hawaii Department of Transportation to designate shoulders on certain highways to allow motorcyclists under certain conditions to ride on the shoulder to get around. That's the only state where that's legal. Interestingly, they do not allow lane filtering or any of the other types of ways to get between cars, but they do allow, and like I said, it has to have a Department of Transportation designation in order for motorcyclists to be able to do that. Then there's lane splitting. That's what a lot of folks have heard about, that California has had forever. Lane splitting, technically all that lane splitting requires is that you're riding between cars. In California, there are no limits on how fast you can go between those cars. There are no limits on how fast the cars need to be going or how slow the cars need to be going for you to ride between them. You can split between. So because there's no speed designations, technically the next one, lane filtering, which is also riding between cars, fits under that umbrella of lane splitting. The difference is that for the most part, the laws that have been passed in other states that allow lane filtering require that cars either be stopped or be going very slowly, and require that the motorcyclist also goes at a very slow speed. So it's not like the lane splitting where you can just go as fast as you absolutely want. I do want to take a moment to talk about, I'm also a grammar geek, and I try to always consider the impact that words have. And as I know that Texas is working on trying to get, what is in your law, lane filtering? Is that what it's proposed to be called? Does anyone know?
It's a kind of in-between hybrid. So in the statute right now, it's not permitted.
Okay, but what terminology do they plan to use?
So my understanding is the Rep. Reynolds bill, they're talking about as lane filtering, but it's really slow speed lane splitting.
Okay.
Because it goes beyond vehicles that are parked.
So something that I was considering with language and all these different terms that we use is that, in my mind at least, splitting and filtering, splitting seems to have just a slightly more negative connotation. So when you're talking with your legislative aides, because we know the aides are the ones who really run the show, right? We learned that this morning from Matt. Consider whether you're calling it lane splitting, which is probably what most of us have called it forever, or whether you're calling it lane filtering. It may just have a little bit better impact to call it lane filtering. Just a suggestion. And then the other term that is used sometimes is lane sharing. Now, Matt mentioned Colorado this morning and that they're doing some very interesting things there. One of the other interesting things that they're doing is their law requires lane sharing. In order to go between vehicles, between cars, you have to have enough room in the driving lane to pass that car on the left in the lane, not white lining or going on the dashed white line. So lane sharing is technically two vehicles side by side, which a lot of us have done on motorcycles. We've ridden side by side with another motorcycle. We have done some lane sharing, just not with a car. And that gets even more hairy in my mind, trying to have enough room for me and a car. But I believe, going off the top of my head, I think in Colorado it's also that the car has to be stopped. So that makes me feel maybe slightly more comfortable riding next to that car, maybe. So let's talk about some advantages or potential advantages of lane filtering. And I'm going to do my best to say lane filtering every time. One of them might be the ability to see farther ahead. When you're between those cars, you may be able to see farther down the road. Look for those hazards until V to I or V to X tells us what might be happening. You may have done a little bit of, used this to your advantage a little bit driving a car. You may have kind of inched over to the left-hand side of the lane so you can kind of see around other vehicles. You're staying within your lane, but you position yourself based on what's going on, possibly to see a little bit farther ahead. Another reason that a car driver might adjust in their lane is to avoid maybe something in their lane, right? They may have to inch over to get around some roadkill. The same reason that we motorcyclists would adjust our lane position to get around things in the road. When we are lane filtering, assuming it becomes legal, or if you go to a state where it's already illegal, we want to keep that in the back of our mind that just as we want the ability to see a little farther ahead, or we want to avoid hazards, car drivers are going to want to do the same thing, especially if traffic is slowed down or stopped. They may want to kind of inch over to see what's going on, what's keeping traffic from moving. So keeping that in the back of your mind when you're trying to position yourself. Besides hazards like our poor sleeping forever armadillo here, what other kinds of surface hazards might you be concerned about as a motorcyclist lane filtering? What kind of debris? Nails? And nails, okay, so I'm going to ask specifically about this because my husband and I had a debate about nails and the shoulder surfing thing, and how his thought was, well, shoulder surfing, there's all that debris there and there's probably nails there, and he was a motor officer. He's actually gotten a couple flat tires from running the shoulder on his police motor. And he said, well, if you're on the white line, chances are you're not going to hit a nail because traffic's going to kick them off. Have you had experience hitting nails on the roadway or more toward the middle of the roadway?
Any place that their car tires don't hit, debris sits.
Okay. Yeah. So you mentioned debris that, I forget what your name is in the front here with the red, that there's going to be some more debris there. Potholes. Well, there's potholes everywhere, right? What's the big deal? Why did that get brought up for along the white line?
So mostly I was talking about glass and that kind of thing that's on that thing. But if we're talking about the white line, there's usually not. It's usually when it's further over. You know, thinking about Texas, we have those wide kind of road. I don't know if it's not quite the emergency lane, but wider shoulders.
Okay.
Right, riding in that shoulder.
I don't think the mic is on, or it's not picking her up.
Pretty loud.
Yeah. I'm trying to help Clyde here, who's trying to keep up with me. All right, so debris, glass would be nasty too. Over here on this side again.
Hydraulic fluid.
Okay, I'll just repeat what you said. Hydraulic fluid. Okay. So what's that?
That one hurts.
All right.
If you get down there to the coastal counties, alligators.
Alligators. Now, I have a question. Are you talking about this kind of alligator? For real? What'd you say? For real alligators. So, do y'all call these alligators, or have you ever heard that? Or what else? What other slang? Road gators. Okay, road gators.
You also got tar snakes too.
Tar snakes, absolutely. You can see in the picture here that it looks like there's a tar snake right along that white line where you might be lane filtering, besides that debris that you're going to have to figure out what to do with. Yeah, the lanes, when they pave the roads, there's usually a seam there. And, ooh, what do you think of this one? The potholes were mentioned earlier, right? Yeah. The roadway tends to break down there on that line. Here's another one that might be a concern. If you're going down that white line and it's raining, now you have to worry about the pavement being wet and slippery. The uneven lanes, that's another concern with, even if the paving is done, you may have had an opportunity to drive through a construction zone where they have uneven lanes, and they're pretty significant. Even just with settling and movement of the pavement, the lanes may be just a little bit uneven, and especially on motorcycles, that can be a little more concerning. Because of that, it was mentioned earlier, potholes. With that seam being there, close to that line, that's a place where the concrete pavement is more likely to break apart. So adding more concern to our debris, to have some sharp concrete pieces there and potholes on top of it. So lots of hazards for us to be concerned about on the road surface itself. Did you have another one? Oil slicks, yeah. And hydraulic fluid you mentioned earlier, it sounds like you have experience, but absolutely, we don't have the constant tire movement to push that oil around and help wash it off the road when it rains. Yeah, and in that case, when it's a light sprinkle, there's probably going to be oil in lots of places, but at least if the tires are continuing to go in the same spot, they may have a chance to kind of wear that oil off or push it into the, if it's asphalt pavement, kind of work it in, basically. So we're thinking we want to lane filter. But what, in general, I mean, even without having the ability to lane filter, what are car drivers in general, what are their attitudes about motorcyclists?
So I used to live in that.
Wait,
All right. So I used to actually live in California, and where lane splitting has been legal for 100 years. And I used to commute through Los Angeles County. And as a car rider, I would watch the motorcycles lane split. When I would see them coming up in my rearview mirror, I'd scoot over to give them room. But you would see the drivers of cars, and I could just assume they were just so mad sitting in traffic that they would actually move in the way of the motorcycle drivers,
okay.
almost to block them or to hit them. Because the motorcycles, they're just going, not having to sit in that traffic.
Yeah.
But the cars are stuck in that traffic. And that's, to me, one of the big things I always remember and took away. Even though I've been here over 20 years, I still remember that. And that's what I think about lane splitting.
Yeah, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes, the car drivers being jealous of us. But, okay, folks, we want lane splitting for multiple reasons, and car drivers, if they've never ridden a motorcycle, they don't have empathy for the motorcycling experience. They don't understand the challenges that we have. They just see us having fun, woohoo, having a good old time, right, on our motorcycles, but they don't see the challenges. One of the reasons we want a lane split, or let's see, let me back up. So they have such a hard time understanding why we would lane split and understanding the rules surrounding riding a motorcycle, the specific rules that cover us. There was a survey done in California, 60% of drivers thought that lane splitting was either illegal or they weren't sure if it was legal. There were that many people who didn't understand. And in Oregon, there was, in 2023, a public opinion traffic safety survey, and over 80% of drivers did not support changing the legislation to allow lane filtering, which they've been working on changing the law as well, and 2/3 of those drivers did not think it was safe. Only 1% of drivers thought it would be a very safe thing to have. So that's a very small minority who maybe have an understanding. Matt said earlier this morning that y'all in Texas here are going to have a, let's see, oh wait, y'all is singular, sorry, all y'all, right? That's plural? That all y'all are going to have a very narrow road to go down to try to have lane filtering become legal in Texas if something that you believe should happen. And you can see a lot of car drivers who have no empathy for what we experience don't support that at all. So when you have that many people not feeling real good about lane filtering, that's part of what makes that road very narrow. There's a perception of us motorcyclists that, we're just all rebels without a cause. We're all out to, what's that? We're all out to cause trouble and so forth, right? That's all of us, of course. But in reality, the lane filtering, there are solid reasons why you may want to have that be passed. Another reason is the heat. Y'all have heat down here? A little bit? So the last time I did ride in Texas many years ago, I was down here for some training and was kindly provided with a motorcycle, and it was not middle of summer. And I was informed that while in Wisconsin we don't ride motorcycles in the winter usually, that all y'all don't ride motorcycles in the summer down here, and I never knew that before. See, that's part of the whole, what happens in different parts of the country that I just love learning about is, okay, that's a Texas motorcycling experience. But you get hot, right? Sitting out there in traffic that's stopped. You may ride a motorcycle that is air-cooled, so your motorcycle may get hot. One good reason to have the ability to lane filter if you choose might be so that you don't have a failure and your motorcycle doesn't have a failure while you're trying to get wherever it is you're trying to go. That lack of empathy, the lack of understanding from car drivers. Minnesota, and I'm not sure if other states did this, but I had the chance to read some of Minnesota's legislation. When they passed lane filtering, which is fairly recently, they also included funding for an awareness campaign. And I would suggest if y'all are advocating with your legislative aides that you consider how you can ensure you have some funding, so assuming the law passes, when it rolls out, you have a way to help educate. Now, we know a lot of folks don't pay attention to those public service campaigns and so forth, but hopefully it'll just get a few more people on our side who understand why we're lane filtering and how to interact with us when we're lane filtering, so they're not trying to cut us off at least as much as before. It was mentioned earlier, the reason they try to cut us off is, you know, have you ever been in traffic, even in your car, and your lane is just at a standstill, and other lanes are moving, right? And you just feel like, it's so unfair. How come their lane is going and I'm stuck here? Well, as was mentioned, drivers in California, they may just really feel it's unfair, and if you're in another state where lane filtering is allowed, being able for you as a motorcyclist who car drivers already hate, for you to be able to lane filter, they're not going to feel like that's very fair. Another reason cited for why lane filtering is a good idea is saving time. Folks who advocate for the law to allow lane filtering will say that it saves time, it reduces commute times for everybody because you're getting other vehicles off the road faster, and it reduces that congestion. A study in Belgium found that that was true, sort of. It was only true when more than 10% of the vehicles in the traffic mix were powered two-wheelers. How often do you see when you're out on the road riding your motorcycle that at least 10% of the vehicles are powered two-wheelers or motorcycles? No, I'm seeing a lot of no's. It's very rare, right? I mean, all of us think everyone should ride a motorcycle, but the reality is there aren't that many on the road in the United States, as Matt mentioned earlier about being in Europe and how there are so many more. That's why in Belgium they were able to confirm that, yeah, if there are more than 10% of powered two-wheelers in the traffic mix, it does shorten commute times and it does help with congestion. So until we get there, that's a little bit of a hard justification. It does shorten commute times for motorcyclists by a lot sometimes, right? Okay.
I'll take it.
If you get to experience that shorter commute time, you might want to keep that quiet because, like I said, the car drivers already think that, you know, it's unfair, and they're probably jealous of us in the first place because we get to ride motorcycles and they're stuck in their cars, right? Except for on the hot days. But yes, it does shorten commute times for motorcyclists. The big reason that a lot of folks push for lane filtering is for safety. It'd just be so much safer if we could lane filter and get through traffic. In 2015, UC Berkeley did a study, and they looked at over 5,000 crash reports for motorcyclist crashes, and they analyzed a lot of different factors in those motorcycle crashes. They did find that for motorcyclists who stayed in their lane, as opposed to motorcyclists who lane split, the motorcyclists who stayed in their lane had double the percentage of their crashes were rear-end crashes compared to the number of crashes that lane-splitting motorcyclists experienced. This statistic reminds me of when my mom was diagnosed with breast cancer. When I went into the oncologist with her, the oncologist said, you know, being that your mother has breast cancer, your chance of getting breast cancer is about double of that of the average population. But she said, here's the deal. I don't want that to freak you out, because the average population has about a 2% chance of getting breast cancer. You have a whole 4% chance. So the 2% is really pretty small. Well, it turns out what the UC Berkeley study found is the motorcyclists who stayed in their lane and did not lane split, about 4% of their crashes were rear-end collisions, whereas the motorcyclists who lane split, about 2% of their crashes were rear-end collisions. You may already be thinking, well, wait a minute, they're lane splitting between cars, who's running into the back of them? Well, it turns out for both sets of folks, other motorcyclists, we were hitting ourselves. But I don't know the exact number on that, but other motorcyclists were rear-ending each other. Not just, you know, we all picture sitting in traffic and being sandwiched between two cars. It's a fear of mine, too. But, you know, when it's your buddies hitting you. Now, okay, so 2%, that's really not a very big change. There's another stat I want to share with you. For motorcyclists who did not lane split, about 16% of the crashes were the motorcyclist rear-ending another vehicle, a car or their buddy. For the motorcyclists who did lane split, 38% of the crashes were the lane-splitting motorcyclist rear-ending someone else. Now, if we're looking at what I'll dispel later as safer versus less safe, when you're looking at a reduction in the number of in the types of crashes that were us getting rear-ended as opposed to us rear-ending someone else, there's a huge difference between the lane-splitting motorcyclists and the non-lane splitting motorcyclists. So the question should be, well, is it really safe or not? If we're going to go to our legislative aides and say, hey, I want this law passed because it'll be safer for me, we should probably have an idea if it really is, right? So I try to stay away from slides that have a lot, but there's a few that I want to share some pretty important things with you. When this UC Berkeley study came out, the AMA, this is right off the AMA's website, they endorsed the practice of legalizing lane splitting and lane filtering, given the long-term success in California and the UC Berkeley Safe Transportation Research and Education Center study showing that it enhances motorcycle safety. Well, in the UC Berkeley study, the UC Berkeley folks said, this study is not without limitations. The primary limitation is our lack of exposure data to estimate how the risk of being involved in a collision changes when motorcyclists choose to lane split. We would require information on both the lane splitting and non-lane splitting riding that is done by some identifiable sample of motorcyclists. The collection of these data is fraught with problems, and the current study did not attempt to collect such data. The current data set cannot be used to compare the collision risks for lane splitting and non-lane splitting riders. Remember, the UC Berkeley study looked at crash reports. They looked at them to analyze the factors in the crashes and the unique characteristics. The goals and objectives for the study. The goal of the analysis was to increase our understanding of collisions involving lane-splitting motorcyclists and of how lane splitting impacts collision injuries. Specific objectives were to compare personal, motorcycle, and collision characteristics of lane-splitting collisions with those of other collision types, the non-lane splitting basically, and to compare the occurrence of head, torso, and extremity injury among lane-splitting riders by the manner in which they were lane splitting. And the manner in which they were lane splitting, one thing that they really looked at that I won't talk about much today, but there's a lot of data in that UC Berkeley study about the speeds the motorcyclist was going, the speeds the car was going, and how much injury there was based on those speeds, and the difference between those two speeds. More from the UC Berkeley report, the findings from this analysis suggest that countermeasures to alter the way motorcyclists lane split are likely to result in reductions in injury. The current data set cannot be used to compare the collision risks for lane splitting or non-lane splitting riders. So far we still don't know if it's safe or not, right? There's nothing giving us that information. One thing that they did find out is that the lane splitting riders, and when they looked at all the characteristics, lane splitting riders tended to be commuters who were riding during the weekdays. They tended to wear better helmets than the non-lane splitting riders. They tended to be not impaired, not have a passenger, and they tended to have fewer injuries. Now, I didn't see anything that said they also had better other gear on, but if you think logically, they had better helmets on and they had fewer injuries. They were commuters who rode that route probably all the time and knew the traffic patterns, and they had fewer injuries. Even if they crashed, they still had fewer injuries. We still don't know if it's safe because we don't know the types of people who, we don't know how much experience they had, we don't know how many years they had been riding, we don't know some of those other details compared to the non-lane splitting riders. We don't have that to compare, and there are so many factors that go into what makes things safer or less safe. So we still don't know a whole lot. There have not been a lot of studies in the United States. Mostly it's been surveys, like I said earlier about the survey of drivers and what their opinions were and their attitudes. There have been a few studies in Europe. Now, as Matt mentioned earlier, Europe is a whole different ballgame. People are used to seeing motorcyclists on the road. There was a study to try to find out, is lane splitting and lane filtering and so forth more safe or less safe, that was done in Belgium. What that study found out was that folks who lane filtered were 4 times more likely to be injured and crash. Okay, so now we're going the wrong direction, aren't we? Because here we're thinking we want to try to prove it's safe. Again, that's a European study. I don't think it's real valid here. So should we legalize it? Well, how do we, if it does get legalized, and assuming that we go about legalizing it with facts instead of the AMA telling us what a report said when the AMA said it was wrong. And by the way, I always question authority because the AMA, I mean, talk about a group that should be just giving solid information, right? So question that authority as you're going to your legislators. Let's assume that you all can get it passed. If it gets passed, what are you going to do to help yourself stay safe if you choose to lane split? Anybody have ideas? No one? Y'all aren't going to lane split? No? Oh, Maurice has an idea. I can't wait for this.
So California has some guidelines that are posted on their site for recommendations, and there's some others. Speed differential is a common one.
So Maurice is just going to go really, really fast, so he avoids the crashes.
Maybe, but the guidelines recommend something different. And so the studies show lower speed differential results in lower crash rates.
Okay.
And that is found in car traffic and all, as you're, right?
Yeah, it sure is. Maurice and I were chatting earlier, and we found out that we both have,
Highway geeks.
we're both highway geeks. We both did or do real highway engineering type things in our real jobs, and we do this stuff for fun. So it's kind of cool to find a brethren that has the same experience. Yes, definitely, even in cars. If you're on a multi-lane local road and there's a turn lane, and that turn lane's kind of backed up, and you're on the through lane and you're going pretty fast past that turn lane, have any of you ever experienced where one lane's really slow and all of a sudden the car pulls out? Having that speed differential, having it be significant, is going to increase your probability of a crash by quite a bit. So kind of consider that whether you're on your motorcycle or in your car. If you're going past a lane that's much slower, you may want to just be a little extra cautious. Yes?
Just being smart about it in terms of when and where to do it. I know I've considered splitting in different, just on my normal commute, there are certain parts of town where I wouldn't want to do it because in that area, the lanes are not as wide. There's not as much room to easily move through there.
Okay. Other thoughts? Got some hands over here.
The only time I would lane split is if traffic is stopped, dead stopped.
Okay.
Then I'll roll slow at a walking speed. I don't zoom through, it don't scare nobody, just somebody appearing beside you.
So it sounds like take some training that allows you to go extremely slow.
Well, first, second gear, just don't zoom past it like we see on the highway now. Nothing more, nothing makes the person yell. So you do like, don't sort of stuff out.
I've been a licensed rider for 61 years now, and I was an MSF instructor for 30, and then I taught total control, Lee Parks' stuff for a number of years, and I'm retired now. But I suspect that why the hands didn't go up when you said how many of us would lane split. If you taught basic rider courses for 30 years, and you think about the students that you had when they walked out of your course, and you told them, with their experience level, we used to say, you passed the course, but can you imagine what would happen to your students if they started to lane split? You saw what the California statistics were. 60% of the people there after 100 years, I think you said, back when motorcycles were, Flintstone motorcycles. What would the people in the state of Texas do who do not what the hell everybody else in the country does? How long would you think it would take those drivers to get used to lane splitting? And I guarantee you there'll be a lot more people pulling over and cutting off you as a lane splitter. So hell no, I'm not going to lane split.
Wait.
As many people that text and drive and don't pay attention, there's no way in hell I'll lane split in Texas. I almost get run off the road when I'm in my car, let alone on a motorcycle. There's no way in hell I'm going to do it.
Yeah.
You never know when some guy who's gonna pull over, change lanes all of a sudden.
So you don't know when someone's going to change lanes, because chances are if it's congestion traffic, somebody's trying to win the game, right? It was mentioned over here someone who had considered lane splitting in some situations where they felt it was safer. I also teach the basic writer course, and I like to tell my students sometimes legal and smart are not the same thing, right? Sometimes something may be legal, like for example, in Wisconsin, the requirement to be a passenger on a motorcycle is you have to be able to touch the passenger foot pegs. My oldest could touch them at age 5. There was no way I was going to take him as a passenger at age 5. He had to wait till he was 8, and then it was only local roads and so forth. So even though it was legal, it just didn't seem smart to me. Now, on the other hand, lane filtering, lane splitting, none of that is legal in Wisconsin right now. If I were sitting in rush hour traffic and I'm watching behind me, and I have left a good gap in front of me, so I have the escape paths that Kathy talked about earlier in the scenarios, right? If I'm noticing that I'm about to get hit from behind, you better believe I'm going to split between cars and take that escape path if that's the best escape path for me. Now, it's not legal, but if the officer tries to give me a ticket for choosing that escape path, and of course I'm not going to use that escape path for 12 miles, I'm going to use it to get out of the way of danger, but technically I've gone out of my lane. It's not legal, but it sure seems smart in that situation. So I have some asks of you. One is, as I mentioned earlier, when we're defending, if we are defending that we believe lane filtering should be legal, try to use factual data. I've only touched on just a very small smidge of the information that was in the UC Berkeley report, and you may find some information in some of the European reports that can help justify your case, but try to use factual data, although I was chatting with Matt in the hallway earlier, and he shared with me that facts don't matter to legislators, emotions matter, the stories matter. So, but you all, I have faith that you can figure out a way to use factual data and maybe a few stories to get your point across. As far as finding that factual data, I mentioned, there are reports out there. I want to tout SMARTER again, Skilled Motorcyclists Association, Responsible, Trained, and Educated Riders. Repository for research papers. They have a bunch of, and this isn't even the entire drop-down list, whole bunch of different topics that they have research papers on. I also want to say that it is a nonprofit, and you can have a membership to it and or you can donate to it. And for those of you who are Motorcycle Safety Foundation instructors, MSF's website is msf-usa.org, right? This is smarter-usa.org, right? Easy to remember. But yeah, you can donate, you can become a member to help support what they're trying to do to be that repository for solid research. I mentioned earlier funding for awareness. Ensure that when you're going to your legislative aids, legislators, that you're making sure there will be some funding for awareness. And TTI is a great resource too to help figure out how to ensure that your state is taken care of for that awareness campaign. I said there's nothing, there are no studies in the United States that prove lane filtering is safer. Figure out how to commission a study. Help the folks at TTI. They're experts at doing studies. Help them figure out how they can get funding and create a study to figure out, is it really safe? Is it safer to have people lane filter? Now, y'all are here, I assume, because you like to learn more. Yay. Consider getting more training. As I said earlier, when the gentleman in the back, where'd my mic go? There it is. Riding slowly between that traffic. Well, if you have some training and you're able to ride very, very slowly, with the option of maybe getting through a little more quickly should you need to, that's probably a good thing to have that training. So if you choose to lane filter, whether it be legal or not, you've got the physical skills and that you keep your mental abilities sharp so that you can lane split safely, because I'd all like to see you around again. Honestly, self-assess. It sounds like you all kind of did that. You figured out, based on my skills and based on what's going on in Texas here, there's no way I would lane split. Help your friends honestly self-assess. If you have a friend who is, I think that's my next slide. Nope. Slide after that. Let's go to this one. Be a role model. Mentor your friends. If they don't have the skills to lane split or lane filter and you know they're going to, see if you can mentor them and explain to them the rationale as to why you are choosing not to, and maybe you'll help keep your friends alive. I want to go back to wearing the right gear. I'm not a huge fan of ATGAT. And the reason is because ATGAT is different for everyone. If you asked 10 MSF rider coaches to define ATGAT, you would get everything from the minimum gear required to be on the training range as being ATGAT to racing leathers, full-faced helmet, airbag, vest, and so forth, what you would wear on a track, and you'd get everything in between. The self-assessing and the figuring out your safety level, where you want to be, you need to figure out what the right gear is for what you're doing, for the riding that you're doing, where you're riding, and so forth. And if you have super, super awesome gear in your closet at home, but you never wear it because it's uncomfortable or hot or whatever, then that gear, that ATGAT, that some folks would say, doesn't do you any good. Wear gear that you can stand wearing, that you'll wear all the time, and that keeps you at the risk level that you can live with and that your family can live with. Most importantly, be kind. We're all in this game together. When you're out on the road, we talked about the attitudes that car drivers have toward motorcyclists. As much as sometimes it's hard to do to be kind to those car drivers that are being jerks, the more kind we are to them as motorcyclists, the better perception they'll have of us, and the more likely they are to have a little empathy toward us. So be kind to each other, be kind to everyone, and I thank you for letting me up. What questions do you have? Way over here, Laura. Run. Oh, Kathy's got it. Okay.
I appreciate your time and your presentation. That's good. Listening to the room, it doesn't sound like a lot of people are in favor of this. And this is seasoned riders that with millions of miles of experience. I want to know who pushes this, because, is it the AMA pushing this in the state of Texas and these other states? Because myself, I wrote on the evaluation, I said, this is great material for those willing to accept the risk, but I'm not. And it doesn't sound like many people among these professionals in here are. Who pushes this in legislatures?
So, as I said earlier, the stories tend to be what helps get legislation passed. I do know in Minnesota, the main proponent to get the law passed, the guy who really pushed it, had been sandwiched. He had been rear-ended in stuck traffic, and he knew 2 other people who had been. So remember that our personal experience doesn't equate to what happens in the rest of the world. So by his account, everyone was getting rear-ended. So therefore they needed the law, and he spent a lot of time pushing really hard to get it passed. Matt, you had your hand up.
Yeah.
Hang on, Matt. Now over here, make sure you all come up with a question, so Kathy has to run over here next.
Yeah, real quick, so kind of from the inside the Capitol perspective, the AMA is definitely an organization that is advancing this subject matter. There's been approach from some independent groups or just independent individuals who have looked for either lane splitting or lane filtering. There is kind of a groundswell within the motorcycle community, kind of loose groups where people think it's legal. Not to derail this conversation, but I'm the guy behind 4122 last session, which codified clearly that lane splitting was not allowed in the state of Texas. I'll be glad to chat with you guys why I did it this way. So there's various swells here and there that pop up who push it. I would say the most consistent one is the AMA.
How many of you were surprised by some of the information that I shared? Okay. It tends to be counterintuitive. So folks who are pushing this may not realize this information, so it's up to us to spread the gospel.
No, I think some of the statistics that you had, for me, it wasn't something that I had looked at. It is, a lot of what you hear from different places and all of that. And if other states are instituting this on a safety, kind of platform, then you're like, well, okay, it's safe, I'm not a big fan of lane splitting, right? I like the idea of lane filtering with stopped traffic, right? I do ride an air-cooled motorcycle here in the state of Texas, right? But I'm also with the whole idea of being sandwiched. When I come to a stop with traffic behind me, I'm all the way over and my tire is almost like next to the car's tire, right? And I've had drivers be like, what the hell are you doing, and I want to make sure that they know I'm there, right? So that if I do need to get out of the way, right, I have a lane to get out of the way, so, yeah, it was good information, thanks.
So, and as far as having the difference between lane splitting and lane filtering, having the cars be stopped. In some states, the law is that the cars have to be stopped. In some states, it's the cars have to be going less than 10 miles an hour. It may be something that if you feel that this should be an option, let's try to make it as safe as we can. Maybe that means advocating for let's allow lane filtering, but only when cars are completely stopped and only slow speeds. Motorcyclists can't go more than 10 miles an hour. Try to shape the law to allow the air-cooled motorcyclists, and perhaps too you try to add shoulder surfing, now that we all know that term, right? Try to add that, because having the shoulder as an option, well, you're going to run the risk of more debris. You've got an awful wide space there.
I know people have asked who's interested. I'm interested in this. Heck yeah. Okay. If you don't want to do it, don't do it. That's fine. That's your choice. But don't tread on me, kind of thing. But to that, I would also add, why are we only talking about air-cooled motorcycles? I have only owned liquid-cooled motorcycles. I have yet to own one that will not overheat in traffic.
Okay. See, again, me up north, it never gets above 65 degrees there, even in July. So this is more information to help. I know, Kathy.
So
She
why
knows.
did they take me to Milwaukee in 11 below? I mean, come on.
But honestly, I'm in because I don't normally ride in super, super hot weather like some of you do. I appreciate the learning.